Hello, and welcome to episode 25 of Dark Academia Queen. I just got done recording season 4, episode 9 of my True Crime Lounge podcast. We were talking about Alabama murders, and I was talking about the Audrey Marie Healy case if you want to wait till Tuesday to check that out, or you can go join my Patreon to watch that episode. Um, I do have some sister podcasts. True Crime Lounge, Sassy Southern Belle, and Just a Breezy Chat. You can go and check out as well. Um, not to say, can't believe we're already on episode 25. Feels like yesterday I just started this thing, and thanks to my friend Gabby, she is my inspiration for making this podcast. I'm not gonna lie. We are going to be talking about some meat. Going to talk about the catacombs of Paris here soon and carnivorous plants. So if you're interested in that, I also started a new segment on my channel called Down the Rabbit Hole, where I will be talking about various moments in history, where that you can go and check out if you're curious to learn. Because I believe that learning is essential, and you always learn something new every day. But today we're going to be talking about one of my favorite poets of all time, Ralph Waldo Emerson. Um, he is, um, as one would say, he was very much my favorite, and definitely to me feels like he belongs in the dark academia category. So, with that being said, I'm going to start us off with one of his poems, that you might recognize. And that poem is, I'm going to see if you can guess which one it is. Mhm. Right. By the rude bridge that arched the flood, their flag to April's breeze unfold. Here once the embattled former stood, and fired a shot heard around the world. And so long since, in silent sleep, alike the conqueror silent sleeps. In time the ruined bridge has swept down the dark stream, and sword screams. On this bank, battle soft screams. We set today for a votive stone that a memory may their deeds redeem. When, like our sires, our sons are gone, and spirit that made those heroes date to die and leave their children free. Bid time and nature gently spare the shaft we raise to them and thee. Concord hymn. Okay, so you're probably wondering, if you click this, who is Ralph Waldo Emerson? Or what do I have to say about him? Well, some things about him. He is the author of the 1856 Six Traits in the 1870s Society and Solitude. He is a poet and essayist. Um, he's also a lecturer and a philosopher as well. He's one of the most influential writers and thinkers of the 19th century in the U.S. He was also made the first major American literary and intellectual figure to widely explore the rights, to write something seriously about, and seek to broaden the domestic audience for classical Middle Eastern works. He not only gave us countless readers their first exposure to non-Western modes of thinking, medical metaphysical concepts and sacred mythologies. He also helped shape the way um, generations of American writers and thinkers approached the vast cultural resources of Asia and the Middle East. Emerson was born May 25th, 1803 in Boston. As a boy, his first contact with non-Western world came by way of merchandise and that bustled across the India wharf into the Boston harbor. a major nexus of Indo-Chinese trade that flourished in New England after the Revolutionary War, and Emerson's first contact with writing from and about the Western world gave by way of his father, William Emerson, um, who was a Unitarian minister with a genteel interest in learning and letters. Now, by in 1817, at the age of 14, he had entered Harvard College, and while at Harvard, he had little opportunity to study the diverse and literary religious traditions of Asia or the Middle East. Now, the curriculum focused on Greek and Roman writers, British logicians, and inclu- philosophers, and post-Enlightenment defenses of revealed religion. As his journals, in libraries borrowing records, however, in his spare time, he paid keen attention to the right rule of European Romantic interest in the Orient or in the East, in which made him the ancient meant that the ancient lands um in the sacred traditions east of classical Greece, such as Egypt, the Arabian Peninsula, Persia, China, and India as well. Now, as an aspiring poet, he also gravitated toward selections of poets that and Eastern took up Eastern themes in Eastern poetry, including the works of Saadi and Hafez, which he took with him to embrace his childhood. Like other Anglo-American readers of this period, Emerson relied heavily on British colonial agents in his knowledge of India, reading treaties, travelogues, and transitions of legal and religious and poetic texts produced in the wake of Britain's imperial expansion into India. As a consequence, um, his writings about South Asia often traffics with menagerie of 19th century Euro American stereotypes and misconceptions. Examples of this can be found in his Indian Superstition, which was a densely elusive poem that composed for Harvard College graduation ceremonies in 1822. In this 156-line poem, Emerson described a superstition, the personification of religious tyranny in Asia, had enslaved, dishonored India. With its romantic primitivism and bombastic imagery, Indian superstition is perhaps closer to caricature and is considered literary art, yet for all in excess. Emerson's poem is notable for departing from a common formula of the period according to which is debased India could only be redeemed throughout the Western colonialism. Instead, he urges India to resist the shackles of the British Empire as forcefully that they should resist the mental chains of religious superstition. He exhorts ordinary Indians to look at the example of the post-revolution America had an emblem of what is a modern democratic nation that they could achieve. Now, after his graduation from Harvard, Emerson's enthusiasm for non-Western subjects world waned, um, primarily because he devoted himself to becoming a Unitarian minister. In 1831, his wife Ellen Tucker Emerson died of TB, as the event galvanized a series of professional and personal changes in his life. In the next year, he resigned as at his pulpit at the Second Church of Boston, publicly citing the fact that he did not believe in the special divinity of Jesus, and thus could no longer administer the sacrament of communion. After traveling through Europe, um, is where he met literary luminaries such as William Wordsworth and Thomas Carlyle. Wordsworth is one of my favorite. He returned home to Concord, and he began a career as a public lecturer, in which lasted almost 50 years. He would marry Lydia Jackson, whom he affectionately referred to as Mine Aja. um, and the location of the ancient kingdom of Lydia. In 1836, Emerson published Nature, the first major statement of mature philosophy and groundbreaking books that catalyzed the transcendentalist movement in New England. And along with Emerson, the New England Transcendentalists were an eclectic group of religious, literary, and education and social reformers that included Margaret Fuller, Bronson Alcott, Theodore Parker, and Henry David Thoreau. Alcock, why does that name sound familiar? The movement grew out of the Unitarianism in the greater Boston area and was deeply influenced by British and German Romanticism. It was especially interpreted by Samuel Taylor Coleridge and revolved around a form of philosophical spirits and the idealism that valued intuition over the senses. So, with the publication of his essays in 1841, um, second series in 1944, and Emerson emerged as a transatlantic literary celebrity. In his essays from the period, Emerson did not explicitly take up Eastern subjects or ideas. However, scholars agree that there are similarities between his Oversoul and his 1841 essay that aim in the Hindu conception of Brahman. And scholars also agree that there are many similarities between Emerson's beliefs and his 1841 essay, Compensation, and the Hindu doctrine of karma. Now, moreover, in his published writings during this period, he cited maxims and the otherwise incorporated allusions drawn from Asia and Middle Eastern literatures with surprisingly regularity. He added three lustres to the non-fiction writing for at least two reasons. The first one was by treating non-Western texts with the same respect afforded to cultural authorities in the Western tradition. He could also disrupt the parochial expectations of his families and European audiences. Second, it was also by adducing evidence from traditions outside of America and Europe that he could assert the universality of his own observations of society, faith, ethnics, and philosophy. Emerson's engagement with Middle Eastern cultures um, is also evidenced in his poetry in the 1840s. For example, he was inspired by his reading of a Persian verse. Emerson wrote Saadi in 1842, a poetic tribute to a forest, panegyrist, and lyrical poet of the same name. Now, when scholars would discuss the limitation of Emerson's writing about the East, they also often refer to the essay Plato, or the Philosopher, which was published in Representative Men in 1850. In that volume, he argues that Greek philosophers brought together the two cardinal facts at the core of the university: unity and variety. And according to Emerson, the tendency to dwell in the conception of the fundamental unity is primarily a Eastern trait, while the impulse toward a variety is a Western one. He praises in Plato what would be valued in himself is the ability to sympathize with the best aspects of unity and variety in detail, East and West. And yet, Emerson's conceptualization of the East in Plato's essay poses problems that were worth noting. Now, as scholars were observed, he seemed to have India in mind. It's muddling distinctions that suggest Emerson was unconcerned about the vital difference among the cultures of Asia and Middle East. He also eschews political and economic comparisons in favor of idealized intellectual ones. Um, also, um, even though Emerson purports to offer a balanced view of the East, loves infinity and a West, and boundaries, his language seems to favor Europe, with his activities of creativity, discipline, arts, and invention, trade, and freedom. over Asia with its immovable institutions and death, unemployable, immense fate. His vague and polarized thinking in Plato closely aligns with the stereotypical typologies about the East and West that prevailed in the wider culture, pointing to the limits of Emerson's intellectual vision when they tried to imagine Eastern the Eastern order. Oh, sorry. In 1856, Emerson composed a lyric poem, originally called A Song of Soul, and later published in the Atlantic in 1857 under the title Brahma. In the poem dramatized an idea that Emerson closely is associated with Hinduism. And although it stands to reason that the poem is written from the perspective of Brahma, the Hindu god of creation, um, the speaker in the poem does not name itself. Instead, the speaker enumerates the ways in which it alludes to characterization. The opening lines of the fourth stanza verse exemplify the riddle like quality of the poem as a whole. But yeah, what do y'all think of Emerson so far? I am curious. Like, he still personally to me is one of my favorite authors. I guess in poets, because I guess I'm going off his literary work. Um, I am that person who loves a good literary read. I can't help it. But in many ways, though, Brahma is a distillation of Emerson's reading of the Hindu sacred literatures over the previous 2 decades, and Bhagavad Gita to capture up Upanishad when Brahma inspired dozens of mocking parodies in the Atlantic in a paradoxical style that proved to be much of the antebellum American readers, who were objected to this exotic of securities. In 1858, he would publish a long essay called The Persian Poetry in the Atlantic as a way of introducing American readers to what was likely an unfamiliar poetic tradition. Emerson drew parallels between the Persian poetry and Homeric epics, English ballads, and the works of Shakespeare. He also noted that the legend of Persian mythology could also sometimes be found in the Hebrew Bible. In 1972, he sailed for England and then Egypt where he started Ellen, as he toured the cities of Alexandria and Cairo. He also noted observations about the pyramids, the Nile River, and the woeful ignorance of the Arabic language. But as a 70-year-old, Emerson, most significant writing about the East were behind him. 10 years later, on April 27, 1882, he died in Concord, leaving an enduring legacy as a seminal figure of modern American Orientalism. His lifelong excursions into the libraries of classical Asian and Middle Eastern literatures were those of enthusiast instead of rigorous scholar, and he often relied on the crude romantic stereotypes and failed to recognize the difference among cultures and peoples of the East. But Ralph Waldo Emerson expanded to eastern horizon in generations of American readers and writers, and then precisely demonstrated how classical Indian, Chinese, and Persian works could be used as a means to bring inquiring self about fresh appreciation of his own profound powers. But that is it on Ralph Waldo Emerson. What do y'all think of him? He personally will remain one of my favorite artists, no matter what. But yeah, that is it. Join me next time as we talk about another one of my favorite poets, Nathaniel Hawthorne.